The park had always been the heart of the neighborhood, a place where families laughed, children ran, and parents sat on benches talking about small things like weather, school, and weekend plans. But everything changed the day a young homeless woman appeared and took a seat on the broken bench near the edge of the trees. No one knew where she came from, no one saw her arrive. She was simply there one morning, sitting silently with her torn backpack held tightly against her chest as if it were the only thing she had left in the world. She didn't speak, didn't beg, didn't ask for food or money, didn't even lift her head when people walked past her. She just sat there, frozen like a shadow, staring down at the dirt as though she were afraid of even breathing too loudly. The neighbors whispered about her immediately. Some said she was dangerous, some said she was sick, some said she would attract trouble. And soon enough the HOA board members marched into the park with their clipboards and cold eyes, looking at her like she wasn't a human being but a problem that needed to be erased. They didn't greet her, didn't ask her story, didn't offer water or help. They simply muttered among themselves, calling her a threat, a disturbance, and an eyesore, deciding she didn't belong there. But the woman didn't move, didn't react, didn't defend herself. She just hugged her backpack tighter, her shoulders trembling in a way that looked more like fear than anger. And her silence made everyone more uncomfortable than any words could have. Days passed, and the homeless woman returned every morning, sitting in the same spot as if she had nowhere else to go, nowhere safe to exist, and as the hours stretched into afternoons, she would simply stare at her hands or at the straps of her ripped backpack like she was trapped inside her own mind. Some children pointed at her, curious, but their parents quickly pulled them away, telling them, "Don't go near her," while lowering their voices like she carried some invisible danger. The truth was nobody knew anything about her. Not her name, not her age, not her past. And yet everyone judged her like they were experts on her life. The HOA became more aggressive. They put up signs around the park that said authorized visitors only, even though no one had ever needed authorization to walk through the park before. They sent emails warning residents to avoid contact, and some even bragged about calling security to remove her. But every time someone tried to push her away, she came back the next day, sitting quietly, her eyes dull and tired, as if she was waiting for something, or someone. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said she escaped from a shelter, others whispered she was mentally unstable, and a few insisted she was faking homelessness just to spy on the neighborhood. But through all the noise, one thing stood out. No one had seen her smile, not once, not even for a second. It was like she had forgotten what kindness felt like. One afternoon, when the sun was warm and kids were giggling on the swings, a little girl named Mia walked into the park holding a small teddy bear and a juice box. She was only 6 years old, innocent, curious, and full of softness the world hadn't taken away yet. Mia's mother sat on a bench talking to another parent, assuming her daughter was playing nearby, but Mia's eyes weren't on the playground. They were on the homeless woman sitting alone under the shade. Mia watched her closely, noticing the sadness in her posture, the way her hair covered her face like she wanted to disappear, and something in the little girl's heart tugged. She didn't see a threat, didn't see a stranger to fear. She saw someone hurting. She let go of her teddy bear and walked slowly toward the broken bench, her little feet crunching the leaves on the ground. As she approached, the park seemed to fall silent, the adults freezing as they realized what she was doing. Several parents stood up, shocked, whispering fiercely, "Stop her. She shouldn't go near that woman." But Mia kept walking, unaware of their panic. The homeless woman didn't lift her head, didn't notice the small footsteps coming closer. She stayed hunched, arms wrapped tight around her backpack like it was her lifeline, and her breathing looked shaky and uneven, like she was scared of something no one else could see. Mia stopped right in front of her, her tiny shadow falling across the woman's worn-out shoes, and for a moment she just stared, studying the woman's trembling hands and the dried tears on her cheeks. The homeless woman finally sensed someone close and slowly lifted her head, her eyes glassy and swollen, the kind of eyes that had cried too many times and gotten no comfort in return. When her gaze met Mia's innocent face, she flinched, her entire body jerking back as though she were afraid the little girl might hurt her, and she whispered something so quiet it sounded like a breath more than a voice. "Please, don't." The entire park watched, frozen, waiting for Mia to scream or run away. But instead, the little girl took a small step closer, her eyes filling with emotion far too deep for her age, and in a soft, shaky voice, she said the words no one expected, "I think you need a hug. Can I hug you?" The homeless woman's face went pale, her lips trembling as if someone had ripped open a memory she buried long ago. Her eyes widened with terror, not the kind of terror that comes from danger, but the kind that comes from pain, betrayal, and touch she hadn't felt in years. She shook her head, backing away as far as the bench allowed, whispering, "No, no, please." And her hands lifted as if to shield herself, not from a child, but from the idea of touch itself. The adults gasped, some reaching toward Mia as if to pull her away, but Mia didn't move. She just stood there, her little hands open, her tiny voice trembling as she repeated, "It's okay. I just thought you were sad." The homeless woman stared at her, tears pooling in her eyes, and for the first time since she arrived in the neighborhood, sound escaped her lips, not a scream, not a cry, but a broken sob that shattered the silence around them. She covered her face, shaking uncontrollably, and the sight of her crying made Mia take one tiny step forward, ready to comfort her. But the woman held out a trembling hand to stop her, whispering, Don't touch me." Mia's mother rushed forward, pulling her daughter back gently, whispering, "Sweetheart, you can't just walk up to strangers." But Mia clung to her mom's hand and looked back at the woman with sadness in her eyes, saying, "But she looks alone." Those words hit harder than any accusation, because the truth was undeniable. She was alone, painfully alone. And as Mia was led away, the homeless woman lowered her head again, her shoulders collapsing like she had just lost the tiny bit of hope she didn't even know she had. The HOA president stood nearby, glaring at the woman with cold eyes, muttering to another board member, "This has gone too far. She needs to be removed." Behind those words was something darker than irritation. There was fear, real fear, as if the homeless woman wasn't just unwanted, she was dangerous to their secrets. No one knew why the HOA was so desperate to get rid of her, why they were acting like her presence threatened more than the neighborhood's image. But the woman's reaction to the hug request, the panic in her eyes, the way she flinched at human touch, it wasn't normal fear. It was trauma. Deep, buried trauma. And whatever caused it wasn't over as the sun set and the park grew quiet. The homeless woman remained on that bench, staring at her backpack again, clutching it so tight her knuckles turned white. When the last family left and the lights flickered on, she pulled the backpack into her lap and slowly unzipped it just enough to peek inside, her face softening with a pain so raw it looked like her heart was breaking all over again. The wind blew gently, lifting a corner of something inside. Something small, something folded, something she touched with trembling fingers like it was the most precious thing she owned. Then she zipped it shut quickly and stared into the darkness, her eyes full of fear. Whatever she was protecting, whatever she was hiding, was the reason she never left. And the reason the HOA wanted her gone so badly. No one knew her story. No one knew her past. No one knew her secret. But one thing was clear. She wasn't sitting there because she was lost. She was sitting there because she was waiting. And the hug she refused was not because she didn't want comfort. It was because she was terrified that if someone touched her, the truth she carried might finally break free. And the truth was something the HOA could not afford the world to hear. The next morning, the park felt different, like the air itself was holding a secret, and even though the sun was shining, there was a coldness that everyone felt but no one dared to mention, because the memory of the little girl approaching the homeless woman still lingered in every parent's mind, making them uneasy, confused, and strangely guilty. The homeless woman returned to the same broken bench, moving slowly, her shoulders hunched, her head bowed even lower than before, as if yesterday's moment had left a wound deeper than anyone could see. She held her torn backpack closer to her chest, clutching it with trembling fingers like she was scared someone would rip it away from her. People watched her from a distance, some whispering, some shaking their heads, some pulling their children closer as if kindness was something dangerous, and the HOA wasted no time stepping into the park like they owned it, clipboard in hand, faces stiff with fake concern as they pretended to evaluate the area while never taking their eyes off the woman. They gathered near the swing set, speaking in low voices, their expressions cold, and though no one could hear every word, one sentence drifted across the grass clearly enough to chill the air. "We need to remove her as soon as possible." The homeless woman didn't look up, but her body tightened, like she could feel the threat even without hearing it. Meanwhile, little Mia couldn't stop thinking about her. She sat on her bedroom floor at home, hugging her teddy bear, replaying the moment when the woman cried, remembering how her eyes filled with pain instead of anger, how her voice broke when she whispered, "Don't touch me." Mia didn't understand why everyone was afraid of the woman when, in her tiny heart, the only thing she saw was sadness, a sadness so heavy it felt like a storm inside a person. She asked her mother softly, "Why can't we help her?" And her mom hesitated, searching for the right words, before finally whispering, "Because we don't know her, sweetie." But Mia didn't accept that. To her, not knowing someone wasn't a reason to leave them alone. It was a reason to get closer. Still, her mom wouldn't let her return to the park, warning her gently but firmly, "Stay away from her, okay?" And Mia nodded with silent eyes, though her heart didn't agree. Back at the park, something else was different too. The homeless woman had new bruises on her arm. Dark, fresh marks that weren't there before. She tried to hide them under her sleeve, tugging the fabric down, but the bruise peeked out anyway, and for a brief moment, she winced as if it hurt just to move her arm. No one asked what happened. No one even tried. The HOA president, noticing the bruise, exchanged a tense look with another board member, and instead of showing concern, his jaw tightened in anger, like the bruise wasn't a sign she had been hurt, but a sign she was becoming a problem. The woman lowered her head again, her breath shaky, and for the first time, her tears didn't fall silently. They dripped onto the dirt beneath her feet, one after another, like she couldn't hold the pain in anymore. She opened her backpack just an inch, her hands shaking violently, and peeked inside as if checking that something was still there, something she couldn't lose, something that meant everything to her. Then she zipped it shut quickly, holding it tightly against her chest like a shield, her eyes darting around the park in panic, as if she felt watched, not by strangers, but by someone she already knew. And she was right. A tall man in a suit stood quietly at the edge of the park near the trees, staring at her with a look that wasn't curiosity. It was recognition, the kind of look that said he knew who she was and why she was there. The moment she saw him, her entire body froze, her face draining of all color, and she pulled her backpack closer as if trying to disappear into herself. The man didn't move, didn't blink, he just stared for a long moment before turning and walking away without a word, leaving the woman shaking so hard she could barely breathe. Whatever connection they shared, it wasn't good. It was fear, deep fear. Later in the day, when most families had left, Mia and her mother walked past the park on their way home. Mia peeked through the fence and saw the homeless woman sitting alone, her head buried in her arms, her shoulders shaking in silent sobs. Mia's small heart cracked open, and she whispered, "She's crying again, Mommy." But her mom pulled her close and said softly, "Don't look, Mia. Let's go." But Mia didn't want to go. She wanted to help. She wanted to say something, anything, that might make the woman feel even a little less alone. As they walked away, Mia stopped suddenly, slipped her teddy bear from her hand, and placed it gently on the ground near the fence, whispering, "Maybe she needs this more than I do." She didn't know her mother saw the gesture, didn't know the homeless woman would later find the teddy bear and hold it like it was a memory she buried long ago. As night fell, the park emptied completely, and the homeless woman remained seated, staring into the darkness with empty eyes. The wind blew softly, rustling the leaves, and in that lonely silence, she whispered something to herself. A tiny, broken voice that no one heard but would have changed everything if they had. "I can't leave, my daughter is here." Tears spilled again, sliding down her face as she clutched the backpack to her heart. And just like that, the truth began to crack open. Not only was she homeless, not only was she broken, but she was a mother. A mother who had lost everything. A mother who was waiting. A mother who was terrified. And the secret she carried was bigger, darker, and closer to the HOA than anyone could imagine. The hug she refused wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the truth. The next day arrived with a heavy gray sky, as if even the weather could feel the sadness sitting on that broken bench, and the homeless woman returned again, moving slowly, limping slightly, her body weaker than before, her eyes swollen like she hadn't slept all night, and she sat down in the same spot, clutching her backpack with shaking fingers as though it was the only thing keeping her alive. People walked past her faster today, avoiding her shadow, pretending not to notice her bruises, her trembling, her tears. The HOA placed a new sign at the park entrance: no loitering. No unauthorized persons. They didn't say her name, but everyone knew who it was meant for. As the woman stared down, a soft rustling sound came from the ground, and she noticed something lying near her feet. A small teddy bear, old but clean, with a tiny ribbon tied around its neck. Her breath caught in her throat, and her eyes widened as she reached for it with trembling hands, lifting it slowly like it was made of glass. The moment she held it, something inside her broke, and she pressed it to her chest, her body shaking with silent sobs. It wasn't just a toy, it was a memory, a reminder of softer days, of a tiny hand that once held hers, of a little girl she used to sing to at night. She buried her face in the teddy bear's fur, whispering a name no one heard. A name so full of love and pain that her lips trembled around it. And as she held it tighter, her other hand slipped, and her backpack fell open just enough for a small photograph to slide out and flutter onto the ground. She gasped and grabbed it quickly, her hands desperate. But before she could hide it, the wind caught the photo and pushed it toward the fence. At that same moment, Mia and her mother were walking past the park again, and Mia saw the photo lying near the gate. Curious, she bent down and picked it up before her mother could stop her. The picture showed the homeless woman, but not broken, not bruised, not alone. She was smiling, holding a newborn baby wrapped in a soft pink blanket, her eyes full of warmth and hope, and written on the back in rushed, shaky handwriting was one heartbreaking sentence: taken by HOA custody. Mia didn't understand the words, but her mother did, and her face went pale as she looked toward the woman on the bench, who was staring back at her with wide, terrified eyes, her hands clutching the teddy bear like she was afraid it would be stolen too. The woman reached out weakly toward the photo, her fingers barely lifting, whispering, "Please, please." And Mia's mother, stunned, slowly walked toward the fence and slid the photo back through the gap, her hands shaking as she did. The woman grabbed it instantly, pressing it to her heart, her eyes filling with tears so raw that even Mia's mother looked away, unable to bear the pain in them. Suddenly, a harsh voice cut through the moment. The HOA president stormed into the park, his face twisted with anger, shouting, "What are you doing? You have no right to interact with her." His tone wasn't protective, it was panicked, like he had been caught, like the photo was proof of something he wanted buried forever. The woman flinched, hiding the photo and teddy bear inside her backpack, zipping it shut so fast her fingers scraped against the metal, leaving small scratches. The president marched closer, his eyes cold and hard, and he glared at the woman with a fury that made her shrink into the bench, whispering, "Don't, please don't," like she knew exactly what that look meant. Mia's mother stepped forward, her voice shaking but firm, asking, "What does the HOA have to do with her child?" The president froze, caught off guard, but then his face twisted into a fake smile as he replied, "She's unstable. She imagines things. There is no child. She's dangerous. We're trying to protect the neighborhood." But the woman's tears told a different story, one of truth, of loss, of a mother who had been ripped apart from her baby. As the president walked away, barking orders into his phone, the woman slowly opened her backpack just enough to pull out the photo again, her fingers brushing the image like she was touching her baby's face, and she whispered with a trembling voice full of broken love, "I'm still here, my sweet girl. Mommy's still here." Then she pressed the picture to her lips and cried silently, her whole body shaking. At that moment, it was clear, she wasn't sitting in that park because she was lost. She was sitting there because her child was somewhere nearby. Somewhere in that neighborhood. Somewhere behind those houses. Somewhere under the control of the HOA. And she would rather sleep on a broken bench, starve, and bleed than leave the place where her daughter lived. Every tear she shed wasn't just pain. It was a mother's desperate hope. And it was only the beginning. That night the park was empty, the sky dark and heavy with clouds, and the air felt thick like the whole neighborhood was suffocating under a secret no one dared to speak. And while every house turned off its lights one by one, the homeless woman stayed on that same broken bench, her body curled forward, her arms wrapped around her backpack as if she were clinging to life itself. The teddy bear Mia left was tucked under her chin, soaked with tears she couldn't stop, and her whispering breaths sounded like someone praying not for herself, but for someone she loved more than anything. When the wind grew colder and the streetlights flickered, she finally stood up on shaking legs and limped toward the trees behind the park, her steps slow, painful, almost collapsing with each movement. And when she reached the shadows, she crouched down, hiding behind the bushes like she had done it 1,000 times before. Minutes passed, long and silent, until a pair of headlights appeared at the far end of the park, and a sleek black SUV rolled in, parking beside the fence. The woman stiffened instantly, every muscle in her body tightening with terror, her breath stopping in her chest as the car door opened and a tall man stepped out. The same man she saw staring earlier. His silhouette was sharp, confident, cruel, and the moment she recognized him, her knees buckled, and she covered her mouth to keep herself from crying out. He looked around the park with cold, calculating eyes, making sure she wasn't visible, and then pulled out his phone, speaking in a low voice that drifted through the night like poison. "She's still here. She won't go away. We need to handle this." Those words made her shake so violently she nearly fell forward, because she knew what handle this meant. She had heard it before, years ago, right before she lost everything. As he got back into the car and drove away, she collapsed onto the dirt, clutching the teddy bear, whispering through broken sobs, "Please, not again, please." The memories she had been trying to bury crashed into her all at once. The yelling, the courtroom, the accusations, the lies that painted her as unstable, unfit, dangerous. The moment they took her baby from her arms while she screamed and begged, the cold signature that stole her motherhood, and the HOA president standing proudly beside. The judge, smiling like he had won a game. He hadn't just taken her child. He had taken her home, her identity, her voice. And the reason was clear now. She knew something. Something about money, about fraud, about HOA accounts she wasn't supposed to see. She had worked in the office once, filing papers, recording transactions, and she had noticed numbers that didn't add up. Money disappearing, signatures forged. When she confronted her husband, the HOA president, he didn't argue, he didn't deny it, he destroyed her. He claimed she was mentally unstable, staged false reports, forced her into evaluations, and convinced the court she wasn't safe for her own newborn. And when they took her baby, she didn't fight back, not because she didn't want to, but because she was threatened. "If you speak again, you'll never see her alive." Those words haunted her every night, and she ran, homeless in the same neighborhood her daughter lived, waiting for even a glimpse of her child from afar. Back in the bushes, she pulled her backpack open and took out the photograph, holding it close to her chest, whispering through tears, "I didn't leave you. I never left you." Her fingers trembled as she smoothed the edges of the photo, trying to wipe away the dirt, kissing the image of her baby wrapped in that pink blanket. Then she pulled out something else, a small bracelet, tiny enough for a newborn, with a single-letter charm, M. She pressed it against her lips, her body shaking uncontrollably as she whispered, "Mia." And in that moment, the truth hit like a lightning bolt. Mia wasn't just a random child from the neighborhood. Mia was her daughter. The same little girl who smiled, laughed, and played in the park. The same child who offered her a hug. The same child she had been forced to watch from a distance. Never touch, never speak to, never claim. When Mia said, "You look alone," it wasn't just innocent. It was unknowingly the closest she had ever been to her own mother. The woman's heart shattered all over again, because she wasn't afraid of being touched by a stranger. She was afraid of touching her own child and losing her forever. She had been told she was dangerous, that she wasn't allowed near Mia, that even a hug could be counted as harassment, as grounds for arrest. That's why she flinched. That's why she cried. That's why she refused the hug, not because she didn't want it, but because she wanted it more than she could survive. She lay there on the cold ground, whispering, "I'm so close, so close." And then her voice cracked into silence as exhaustion pulled her into a painful sleep. But she wasn't alone. Someone else had seen everything. Mia's mother, unable to sleep, had returned to the park to clear her mind, and she spotted the woman behind the bushes, curled up, shaking, holding onto the teddy bear like a lifeline. She was about to turn away, to walk home, to pretend she never saw it. But then she heard the woman whisper one last trembling sentence in her sleep. "Please, let me see my daughter," and Mia's mother froze. Her heart pounded. Her breath stopped. Because she knew that voice wasn't madness. It was a mother's voice. A mother begging the world for a chance to love again. And suddenly, the HOA's cruelty made sense. The fear. The panic. The lies. They didn't just want to remove a homeless woman. They wanted to erase a mother. But the truth had finally slipped out into the night, and truth has a way of refusing to stay buried. The next morning arrived with a strange tension hanging over the neighborhood, like everyone could feel something was about to break. But no one knew what it was, and while children played and parents pretended everything was normal, there was a quiet fear in the air that made people glance over their shoulders more than usual. The homeless woman dragged herself back to the broken bench, her steps weak and unsteady, her face pale from exhaustion, and she sat down slowly, holding her backpack against her heart like she was trying to keep it from disappearing. She looked toward the houses across the park, her eyes searching for one window in particular. The window she had spent months staring at from afar. The window where Mia sometimes appeared, smiling, laughing, living a life her mother was forbidden to be part of. Her lips trembled, and she whispered to herself, "My baby, so close." The words shook out of her like broken pieces of hope. Meanwhile, inside her house, Mia's mother paced back and forth, her mind racing with the heavy truth she had heard the night before. She couldn't stop replaying the woman's desperate whisper. "Please, let me see my daughter." It wasn't madness. It wasn't aggression. It was heartbreak. And suddenly everything connected in her mind. The fear in the woman's eyes, the way she stared at Mia, the photograph, the bracelet with the letter M, the tears that fell whenever Mia walked away. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a truth too painful to ignore. She sat on her couch, her hands shaking, whispering to herself, if she's the mother, what did the HOA do? And that thought terrified her more than anything, because she had always trusted the HOA, believed their rules, respected their authority. But now she saw something darker beneath their perfect smiles. Control, manipulation, power. Unable to stay silent, Mia's mother grabbed her purse and walked straight to the HOA office, her heart pounding as she pushed open the glass door. Inside, the HOA president sat at his desk, confident, calm, sipping coffee like he owned the entire world. When she stepped in, his fake smile appeared immediately, but she didn't smile back. Her voice shook as she said, "I want to know the truth about that woman." His smile faded instantly, replaced with irritation, and he leaned back in his chair, saying coldly, "She's unstable. Dangerous. Stay away from her. For your daughter's safety." But this time, Mia's mother didn't back down. She slammed the photograph on his desk, the one of the woman holding her newborn, and asked, "Is this her child?" The president's face tightened, his jaw locking, his eyes sharp with panic, but he quickly forced a laugh and said, "Photos mean nothing. She imagines things. She lost custody because she's mentally unfit." But the lie sounded too smooth, too rehearsed, and his voice cracked the slightest bit, revealing fear underneath. When Mia's mother asked, "Where is the child now?" he stood up abruptly, pointing to the door, barking, "This meeting is over." She walked out shaken, but more suspicious than ever, her heart racing, because his panic didn't come from concern, it came from guilt. Outside the office, she turned to look toward the park, and there sat the homeless woman, clutching her backpack, her eyes full of pain, and Mia's mother whispered to herself, "She's not crazy. She's a mother." Back in the park, the homeless woman slowly unzipped her backpack just enough to pull out the tiny bracelet again, her fingers brushing the letter M like she was touching her daughter's hand, and she whispered through tears, "Mia, Mommy's here." Just then, a shadow fell across her, and she looked up to see two HOA board members approaching, their faces cold and stern. One of them crossed his arms and said sharply, "You need to leave. Today. This is your final warning." Her eyes widened with terror, and she shook her head desperately, whispering, "Please, my daughter, she's here. I can't go." But they didn't care. They moved closer, grabbing her arm roughly, pulling her up from the bench as she cried out softly, "No, please, don't take me farther away." At that exact moment, Mia appeared at the park entrance, holding her mother's hand, and when she saw the two men dragging the homeless woman, she screamed, "Stop!" Her little voice echoed across the park, freezing the men in place. The homeless woman saw Mia and collapsed to her knees, reaching out with shaking hands, whispering, "My baby." But the words were so soft no one understood them except Mia's mother, who felt her heart stop in her chest. One of the men snapped, "This is HOA property. We're removing her." But Mia's mother stepped forward, her voice firm, trembling with emotion, saying, "You don't get to decide everything." The men glared at her, their jaws clenched, and one muttered under his breath, "You have no idea what she is." But Mia's mother replied, "I know she's hurting. And I know you're hiding something." As the tension rose, the homeless woman tried to stand, but her legs gave out, and she fell forward, dropping her backpack. It spilled open, and out tumbled the photograph, the baby bracelet, and a folded legal document. The wind flipped the paper open, revealing bold words at the top, "Custody agreement." Mia's mother rushed forward, grabbing the paper before the HOA men could snatch it, and her eyes widened as she read the signatures. One was the homeless woman's. The other was the HOA president's. It was proof. Proof that he had taken the child. Proof that he had control. Proof that this woman wasn't a stranger. She was a mother silenced by power. The homeless woman crawled toward the bracelet, holding it to her chest, sobbing, "I never left her. They took her from me." And Mia, seeing the tears, broke free from her mother's hand and ran to her, wrapping her tiny arms around the woman's shoulders in a hug the woman never got to accept before. The homeless woman froze, her whole body trembling, her breath catching, and then, after a long painful moment, she hugged Mia back. Slowly, gently, desperately, as though she was holding her heart after years of losing it. Tears fell from both of them, and the park fell silent. In that one hug, the truth finally touched the world. And nothing could stop what was coming next. The moment Mia wrapped her small arms around the homeless woman, the entire park seemed to stop breathing, as if time itself froze to witness a truth no one was ready to face. And for a long trembling second the woman didn't move, her body stiff with shock, her eyes wide with fear, like she didn't know whether she was allowed to feel love anymore. Then, slowly, shakily, her arms lifted, her hands trembling as she held Mia close, and the hug that she once refused became the hug she needed more than air, more than safety, more than life. Her tears poured down her face, dripping onto Mia's shoulder, and every tear felt like a voice, a silent scream she had been forced to swallow for years. The HOA board members stared in disbelief, their confident faces cracking with panic as they looked around, realizing that people were watching. Neighbors were stepping out of their homes, phones were being raised to record, and the lie they had built so carefully was slipping through their fingers one shaky breath at a time. Mia's mother rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside them, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Is it true? Are you her mother?" The homeless woman swallowed hard, her whole body shaking, and she nodded slowly, pressing her forehead to Mia's hair as she whispered in a fragile voice, She was taken from me." The words weren't loud, but they were powerful enough to cut through every lie, every rumor, every false warning the HOA had fed the neighborhood. Mia's mother covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes, realizing that the stranger everyone feared was actually the person who loved Mia first. The HOA men stepped forward urgently, one shouting, "She's lying. She's unstable. She's dangerous." But their voices sounded desperate now, shaky, cracked with fear, not authority. The document in Mia's mother's hand trembled as she held it up, shouting back, "Then why is his signature on the custody papers?" And her voice carried through the park like thunder. Before anyone could respond, the sound of footsteps pounded across the pavement, and the HOA president himself stormed into the park, his face red with rage, his eyes wild, barking, "Everyone step away. This is a legal situation." He marched straight toward the homeless woman, reaching out as if to tear Mia out of her arms, but Mia clung tighter, screaming, "No!" And the homeless woman's body curled around her protectively, whispering, "Don't take her. Please don't take her." The president snapped, "She's not your child anymore." And those words stabbed through the air like knives, making the woman flinch as if she had been physically hit. Mia's mother stood up, stepping between them, her voice shaking with fury. "You stole her child. You destroyed her life. And you left her on the street. The president tried to laugh it off, waving his hand dismissively, but the tremor in his fingers exposed the truth. He was losing control. Neighbors began whispering, filming, questioning, and the once powerful HOA suddenly looked small, cracked, exposed. The president lunged toward the woman again, growling, "Give her to me." But before he could touch them, the homeless woman screamed, a raw, heartbreaking scream that came from years of grief and silence, a scream that made everyone freeze in terror and sympathy at the same time. "She is my daughter," she sobbed, holding Mia so tightly her body shook. The president stopped mid-step, his face draining of color, because that scream wasn't madness, it was truth. A mother's truth. A truth he could no longer bury. Mia pulled back just enough to look into the woman's tear-soaked face, her little voice trembling as she asked, "Are you really my mommy?" The woman gasped, her breath breaking, and she nodded, touching Mia's cheek with a shaking hand as she whispered, "Yes, my sweet girl. I never wanted to leave you. They took you from me." Mia stared into her eyes, and something deep inside her seemed to recognize that love, that pain, that bond that had always been there even in silence. She leaned forward and hugged her again, whispering, "I missed you." Even though she didn't understand why she felt that way, she just did. The president panicked, shouting, "This is illegal. This woman is mentally unfit. She doesn't deserve custody." But his voice was drowned out by Mia's mother, who turned to face him with fire in her eyes and said, "You told us she was dangerous. You told us she was crazy. You lied to all of us." The crowd murmured louder, their trust in him crumbling, and the president snapped back, "I did what was best for the community." But even he didn't believe those words anymore. His mask had shattered. Then came the moment that changed everything. The homeless woman reached into her backpack, her fingers trembling violently, and pulled out a small folded paper, worn and creased from being held for years. She opened it slowly, revealing a medical report, one that declared her mentally stable, clued, fit, capable, proof that she had never been unstable at all. The HOA president lunged forward to grab it, shouting, "That means nothing." But Mia's mother snatched it first, holding it high as she shouted, "You lied in court. You forged the evaluation. You used the HOA's power to take her child." Gasps erupted around the park, and in that moment, the truth wasn't hidden anymore. It was standing in the open for the whole world to see. The homeless woman collapsed to her knees, still holding Mia, sobbing into her shoulder, whispering, "I never stopped loving you, not for 1 second." And Mia's tiny hands brushed the tears from her mother's face as she whispered back, "Don't cry, Mommy. I'm here." And for the first time in years, the woman didn't feel alone. She didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel erased. She felt seen, heard, and loved. The HOA president, once powerful and feared, now stood frozen, exposed, and trembling, because the one thing he tried hardest to destroy, truth, had finally come alive. And in the middle of that broken park, under the heavy gray sky, a mother and child reunited not through legal papers or rules or permission, but through the one thing the HOA could never control, a hug that spoke louder than every lie ever told. And from that moment on, there was no going back. The battle was no longer about removing a homeless woman. It was about justice. And justice was coming. The park fell into a heavy silence as the truth hung in the air like a storm ready to break. The homeless woman still kneeling with Mia in her arms, trembling, crying, holding onto her child like she was afraid the world would rip her away again. And the HOA president stood frozen, his face pale, his lies collapsing around him like a house built on sand, and for the first time, people saw him not as a leader, but as a man terrified of the truth he could no longer control. Mia's mother lifted the medical report higher, her voice shaking but strong as she shouted, "You ruined her life for your own power." And neighbors who once looked away now stepped closer, anger rising in their eyes, their phones recording every second, their whispers turning into a wave of disbelief and fury as they finally realized this woman wasn't a danger, she was a victim. The HOA president tried to regain control, barking orders, pointing fingers, screaming, "Stop filming. This is private HOA business." But no one listened anymore, and his voice, once powerful, now sounded desperate and small. Suddenly, The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder and louder, and the president's face twisted with panic as he spun around, shouting, "Who called them? Who called the police?" His voice cracked, and Mia's mother stepped forward, staring him straight in the eyes as she said, "I did." Within seconds, police cars pulled up beside the park, lights flashing red and blue across the grass, and officers rushed out, their expressions serious as they approached the scene, taking in the crying woman, the custody papers, the bruises on her arms, the shaken crowd, and the HOA president who was already backing away like a cornered animal. One officer knelt beside the woman, speaking gently, "Are you okay? Do you need medical help?" And she clutched Mia tighter, whispering, "Please, don't take her from me again." Her voice broke so deeply that even the officer's eyes softened, and he responded quietly, "No one is taking her from you. Not today." Another officer turned to the president, asking, "Sir, we need to talk to you about the custody documents and allegations of fraud." The president tried to laugh it off, stumbling over his words. "This is ridiculous. She's unstable. She doesn't know what she's saying. She's been dangerous. She's trespassing." But before he could finish, the officer held up a hand and said firmly, "We have witnesses. We have proof. We have signatures." His voice was unshakable. The president's face drained of color, and he tried to step back, but the officer grabbed his arm, slipping handcuffs around his wrists as he read him his rights. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Mia's mother covered her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks. Not tears of sadness, but tears of justice finally arriving after years of silence. The homeless woman watched, her breath trembling as she saw the man who destroyed her life being led away, and as the president looked back at her one last time, there was no power left in his eyes, only fear. The officers escorted him to the police car, while other board members protested, insisting they knew nothing, but detectives arrived with files, emails, and financial records, revealing months of stolen HOA funds, forged documents, fake medical evaluations, and illegal custody manipulation. One by one, the board members were questioned, handcuffed, and taken into custody, their confident faces crumbling into panic and shame, their perfect HOA image shattering in front of the entire neighborhood. Meanwhile, the homeless woman, no longer just a homeless woman but a mother, was gently helped to her feet, her legs weak, her body exhausted, and the officer guided her toward the ambulance, asking softly, "Do you have a name we can record?" She wiped her tears, held Mia's hand tightly, and whispered, "My name is Emma." It was the first time anyone in the neighborhood had ever heard her speak her name, and it felt like a rebirth, like she was finally stepping out of the shadows she had been trapped in for so long. Mia squeezed her mother's hand and whispered, "I'm staying with you," and Emma's voice cracked as she replied, "I will never leave you again." As Emma was seated inside the ambulance, Mia's mother approached carefully, placing a hand on Emma's shoulder, her eyes soft with apology and admiration. "I'm so sorry we didn't know. I'm so sorry we didn't help sooner." Emma shook her head gently, whispering, "You helped when it mattered." Her gaze shifted toward Mia, and she brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face, whispering, "You found me." Mia smiled through tears and held out the teddy bear she once left behind, saying, "This is yours, Mommy." Emma took it with trembling hands, hugging it close, and for the first time in years, she smiled, a small, fragile smile, but real. Days passed, and the story spread through the community, the news, and the courts. Emma was granted legal protection, medical care, and temporary custody of Mia while the investigation continued, and every step of the process revealed more lies, more fraud, more abuse from the HOA president. The judge who once signed away Emma's rights now listened closely to the truth, and Emma, no longer silenced, spoke bravely, telling the world how she had been manipulated, threatened, and erased. The court overturned the custody ruling, granting Emma full parental rights, and when the final decision was spoken, she broke down in tears, collapsing into Mia's arms, holding her like she was holding her entire world. The neighborhood changed too. The park was cleaned, the "No Unauthorized Persons" signs were taken down, and a new bench was placed where the broken one once stood. On the back of it, the community engraved a small plaque that read, "Every person deserves a place. Every voice deserves to be heard." Emma moved into a small home nearby, no longer homeless, no longer invisible, and every morning she walked with Mia to the park. The same park where her pain once lived, now filled with laughter and healing. Neighbors greeted her, not with fear, but with respect, knowing they had witnessed the strength of a mother's love. Something more powerful than any HOA rule, any courtroom lie, any threat. And sometimes, when Emma sat on the new bench with Mia curled beside her, she would whisper softly, "You saved me," and Mia would smile and reply, "I just gave you a hug." And Emma knew deep in her heart that the hug she once feared had become the hug that brought her life back. The hug that broke the silence. The hug that reunited a mother and child. The hug that exposed the truth. And the hug that reminded everyone watching that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything.